and introduce the presenters for today.
Thanks, Chuck. Yes, this is Chris Cable from the Auditor General's Office, and I wanted to welcome everyone to the webinar today. We're really happy to see so many people signed up for the webinar. We had over 200 people registered for today, and that's a great sign because I know that everybody is going to get some really good information on student activities controls, and we're excited that people are interested in learning more so that they can do a better job with some of those things in their district. We also want to thank ASBO for being gracious enough to host the webinar today. We really appreciate the opportunity to reach out to all of you without anybody having to drive into town to hear us. We also want to thank everyone who emailed in topics for today's webinar. We appreciated getting that input and have incorporated information into the webinar today based on your input. Today I have with me Amanda Wynn and Elizabeth Whitaker that worked very diligently on preparing the information for today, and we're looking forward to sharing it with you. Before they start, I'll give you an overview of what we'll cover. In today's webinar, we'll start off reviewing the importance of controls for student activities, what activities are student activities, and then we'll walk you through both the cash receipt and cash disbursement process, detailing the steps involved. We'll wrap things up by looking at the monthly reconciliation of cash receipts and disbursements through your bank account reconciliation, and we'll stop here and there to address your questions throughout. So first off, why are controls over student activities so important? Although student activities might seem like an immaterial area to a district or even just to a school, student activities is one area that can have a greater than normal risk of loss or misuse of money. We've probably all heard of instances where a club sponsor simply stored monies collected in an unlocked desk drawer before depositing them without any real record of the monies collected. And unfortunately, many of us may know of times when those monies went missing. Without records or procedures for properly safeguarding monies, how could anyone determine how much money was lost, or even when it was lost? And definitely, you couldn't determine who might have taken it. Of course, all monies are at some risk of loss or theft, but one reason that there's a greater risk with student activities monies is that those monies are generally in the form of cash. So unlike checks, they can be used by anyone that gets a hold of them. Another reason for the greater risk is that student activities monies may change hands frequently as students, sponsors, and other school employees receive the monies, often in informal settings like classrooms or on campus grounds during lunch or after school. Finally, the risk can be greater because those handling monies often have received little or no formal training in accounting for and safeguarding monies. After all, one of the people involved in this process throughout is the sponsor, and they're generally teachers that have other responsibilities to think about. So without training on the specific procedures to follow, they might not think about the value of the controls that we'll go over today. All of these issues lead to a greater chance that student activities monies can be misplaced or stolen. And they point out the importance of having good procedures in place to monitor and safeguard student activities monies. As someone involved in the process, it's important for each of you to not only protect the student money, but to also protect yourself and your coworkers. Good controls not only safeguard monies, they protect the people involved in handling those monies from false accusations. The same paper trail that in some instances can give evidence of a theft or misuse of monies can in other instances give evidence of the proper handling of monies. The USFR describes the procedures we'll go over today in even more detail and can be used to help ensure that you're maintaining complete and accurate records and safeguarding monies at all times. For some of you, the information we're covering today may be simply a refresher on how to establish good controls over student activities. If that's the case, we also hope you'll be able to use this webinar in the future as a training tool for others at your district, either by having them view the recorded webinar or by using information from the webinar in district-specific trainings that you develop. Today's webinar will cover the controls needed to address the risks associated with handling student monies, including ensuring that the district maintains accurate records, appropriately safeguards cash, and we'll go over how even small districts can operate with proper separation of duties. While the procedures in the USFR and those that we review in the webinar today illustrate proper separation of responsibilities among employees, we wanted to take a minute here to point out 3 key types of duties that shouldn't be assigned to just one person. Those duties are cash handling, authorization, and record keeping. Before we can go over the proper controls needed with student activities monies in more detail, showing you how to separate those duties, there are a few more general student activities topics that we need to cover to make sure we're all on the same page when we refer to the types of activities that are considered student activities, as well as what responsibilities the governing board has in oversight for student activities revenues and disbursements. So I'm going to turn things over to Elizabeth to go over those topics before she covers establishing procedures for cash receipts.
Thanks, Chris. So first off, when we refer to student activities, what is included? Well, student activities monies are raised by the efforts of students with governing board approval. Generally, such monies consist of monies raised by students, organizations, school plays, or other student entertainment. Some monies that can get confused with student activities monies include auxiliary operations monies, which consist of monies raised by the bookstore and monies raised at student athletic events. Tax credit monies, paid or donated for extracurricular activities. And even some non-district monies, such as PTO and booster club monies. It is important to keep student activities monies separate from non-student activities monies to allow for proper recording and reporting of each to ensure that all monies are used in line with their applicable restrictions. There can be a wide variety of student activity fundraisers, but all fundraisers must be approved by the governing board. The governing board can provide general approval for various types of activities and specific approval for special events. Your school's policy manual should include a policy for student activities fundraisers. Some common examples of student activities fundraisers are shown here. I'd like to point out that only gifts or donations specified for a specific student activities club should be deposited in a student activity account. Other donations received by a school should be placed in the appropriate gifts and donations fund. Another issue we are often asked about is whether a student club can have a raffle or a drawing, like a lottery. The answer to this question was addressed by the Attorney General opinion listed on this slide many years ago, and it's still true today. Student clubs are considered school-controlled and are not allowed to hold raffles or lotteries. While we are on the subject of governing board approval of student activities fundraisers, statute also requires the governing board to do a few things related to student activities. The governing board must appoint a student activities treasurer to oversee all student activities and report back to the governing board monthly. The board also is responsible for authorizing the student activities bank account and designating the authorized check signer, one of which must be the student activities treasurer. If your district has multiple schools, you can still use one account and one treasurer, but you may choose to have a separate bank account for each school, and you also have the option of appointing an assistant student activities treasurer for each school. Sometimes it isn't easy to tell if an activity is student activities or if it's a school fundraiser or event. When deciding if money should be accounted for as student activities money, you can ask yourself the following questions. who can decide how the money is spent, and who collects the money. If students in a student club get to decide how the money is spent, and if students or a club sponsor collect the money, chances are the money is from a student activity. Amanda will go into more detail on student approval when she covers disbursement. But for now, let's consider the example of a school yearbook. We have seen yearbook handled as a student activity, but it isn't always that way. In our first example, there is a yearbook club. Students order the yearbook. The monies are collected by the club sponsor, and students must authorize the expenditures. In this example, the yearbook is considered a student activity. In our second example, there is no yearbook club, but there is a yearbook class. The students order the yearbooks here too, but money is collected in the school office. Further, in this example, expenditures are not subject to student authorization. In this example, the yearbook would not be considered a student activity. Another time it can be difficult to tell if a fundraiser is truly student activities is when the efforts of more than one group are combined in one activity. If a student club participates in a joint fundraising project with an outside group, such as the PTO, the proceeds should be allocated proportionately between the two organizations based on the level of effort devoted by each group on the project. How the proceeds will be split should be determined ahead of time, documented, and approved by the student activities treasurer before the fundraiser begins. Activity reports and cash collections reports that I will cover next should be used for all student activities fundraisers as well as joint fundraisers. So next, let's take a look at when these forms are used. As I mentioned, monies collected can be accounted for and recorded using either an activity report or a cash collection report. I will go over each in more detail, but for now it's enough to know that an activity report is used when selling tickets or similar numbered items, while a cash collection report is used when sales are documented in a different manner, such as using a cash register or receipt book. Regardless of the form used to account for the cash collection, the most important thing is to make sure that monies are adequately safeguarded at all times. Monies could be locked, perhaps in a safe or even in a locked desk drawer, as long as access to that locked area is restricted. One problem we have seen many times in our reviews at districts is someone trying to secure monies in a safe that many people need access to for other monies, or records also kept in that safe. The point of using a safe to hold monies isn't simply that it should be locked, but that the access to the safe should be restricted to only those who should have access to the monies. So while a safe is physically stronger than a locking cabinet or drawer, it may be less restricted if too many people keep their monies or records in the safe, thus making the cabinet that's been locked or drawer a better option for limiting access to the money. The USFR provides a sample activity report that districts can use as is or modify to meet their needs. The report details information such as the first and last ticket numbers, the total number of tickets sold, and the sales price of each ticket sold. The report also includes an area in the lower left to record the money collected by denomination. If there is any cash overage or shortage, it should be recorded and explained on the activity report. Let's now take a look at an example of how the activity report is used in the cash receipt process. Remember that the activity report is used to record ticket sales and reconcile sales to cash collections, such as when a student club sells tickets to a dance or a play. Let's walk through the sale and cash collection process using a chess club fundraiser as an example. You will see as we go through the example that we have indicated that 3 employees are involved in this process, 2 in the district office and a sponsor. who they are is less important than the separation of responsibilities that is shown by having different people involved in the various tasks. Remember, no one person should have cash handling, authorization, and record-keeping responsibilities. That said, our process begins with Mr. Money, the student activities treasurer. Mr. Money issues the pre-numbered tickets to be used for club ticket sales. In this specific case, the chess club is selling tickets for its annual tournament. Mr. Money records the beginning and ending ticket numbers, school, club, date, and total number of tickets issued in the student activities ticket log. The bookstore manager, Mrs. Book, then gets the pre-numbered tickets from Mr. Money and prepares a change fund. Mrs. Book also prepares the activity report by indicating the report number, change fund receipt number and amount, ticket type, and beginning and ending ticket numbers on the activity report. Mrs. Book issues the tickets, change fund, and copy of the activity report to the club sponsor, Mr. Knight. Mr. Knight signs for the change fund and oversees the club sales. After all the ticket sales, Mr. Knight completes or reviews the activity report, makes a copy of the report for the club's records, and returns the activity report, remaining tickets, change funds, and cash collections back to Mrs. Book. Mrs. Book counts and signs for the net cash collections and change funds, giving a receipt to Mr. Knight for the club's records. Mrs. Book verifies the cash and tickets returned, the mathematical accuracy of information on the activity report, and reconciles total ticket sales to actual cash collected on the report. She also safeguards all cash collected, as well as the change fund, in the bookstore safe and maintains copies of all activity reports. If discrepancies are noted in the activity report, Mrs. Book follows up on the issues and notes the resolution in the area provided on the report. So, an activity report works fine for ticket sales. But what if the chess club decided to sell tournament t-shirts instead? Since tickets are not involved in this case, the club will use a cash collections report to document and record its sales and cash collections. A cash collection report is similar to an activity report. It details much of the same information, but deals with receipts, not tickets. Those receipts are either from a receipt book with duplicate copies or a cash register. If a cash register is used to document sales, like in a student store, the register's total sales tape should be run by someone other than the cashier and attached to the cash collection report. You can also use a cash collection report for sales, where you take a count of items before and after the sale to document sales if using receipts is not practical. One example of this type of sale would be snow cone sales, where the students hope to sell many snow cones and do it quickly enough that they don't all melt before they collect the money and give out the snow cones. In this case, issuing receipts would cause unnecessary delay. So instead, sales can be tracked by counting the number of paper cups used for the snow cones before and after the sale to determine how many were sold. The count should be done by someone not involved in the sale, like the bookstore manager. With the cash collection report, the process begins with the bookstore manager, Mrs. Book. This example assumes the club will use a receipt book to document sales. Mrs. Book prepares a change fund and a cash collection report with the beginning and ending receipt numbers. The receipt book, cash collection report, and the change fund are then issued to the club sponsor, Mr. Knight. Mr. Knight signs for the change fund, receipt book, and cash collection report. He oversees t-shirt sales and completes or reviews the cash collection report accordingly. The club issued a cash receipt for each sale, so Mr. Knight will record the number of the last receipt used on the cash collection report and submit the report, the receipt book, the change fund, and all cash collected back to Mrs. Book. Mr. Knight should make a copy of the cash collection report for the club's record. Once Mrs. Book counts and signs for the net cash collections and change funds and gives Mr. Knight a receipt for the total cash received, including the change fund, she reconciles the cash collections to the sales reported on the cash collection report and confirms sales to the receipt book. Mrs. Book is responsible for safeguarding all monies until they are deposited and maintaining copies of all cash collection reports. So, now that we have looked at how to document sales and cash collections for fundraisers, there is one more form that may be used when more than one activity or cash collection report is completed for a given day. This helps account for the total monies received that day and held for future deposits. The daily cash collection summary form summarizes the cash collections from all reports that day. For example, Mrs. Book could receive monies from 3 clubs in one day, and she would list each club's activity in the top portion of the summary form, and then total all of the cash collections in the lower portion of the form. Once all monies are accounted for, Mrs. Book would determine if she needs to make a deposit based on the district's deposit policy. Deposits should be made daily if material, or at least weekly. So when it's time to make a deposit, Mrs. Book prepares a deposit slip. The deposit slip amount should agree to the amount on the daily cash collection summary, or summaries if the deposit is for more than one day's activity. She then deposits the cash. She attaches the validated deposit receipt to the daily cash collection summary, or summaries, and provides this along with the related activity reports and cash collection reports to Mr. Money. Mr. Money should then review the daily cash collection summary report and activity and cash collection reports, ensuring that amounts agree in the document. He then records the cash collections in the accounting records for the appropriate club. Finally, he signs all forms to indicate his review and approval and files a waiver of support. Now that we have covered the cash receipt process, we would like to take some time to walk through a common situation we often find at districts. Many times we see that even when there are enough people to properly separate duties, one person can get overloaded with duties because separation wasn't taken into account when duties were assigned. Or because of the clerical nature of the duties, they get assigned to the same person, like the sponsor shown here. When this occurs, you can make adjustments to separate some duties and add in compensating controls for others. Since, in this example, the sponsor is collecting money at student activities events, reconciling the sales to the amount collected, preparing and depositing the cash, recording the transaction, and reconciling bank accounts, the process would be susceptible not only to fraud, but also mistakes that might go undetected. Let's look at this more closely, using the chess tournament example. Say the club sponsor, Mr. Knight, were to issue and sell 50 tickets to the upcoming chess tournament for $10 each. He should then have a total of $500 collected, $500 to deposit, and $500 to record. After the sales are complete, let's say that Mr. Knight counts the number of tickets after the sale and finds that he only sold 48 tickets. This could happen if they forgot to give a couple of people the ticket. Mr. Knight then counts the money he has collected and finds he has $500, which he then assumes is $20 too much. What should he do with the extra collection? Pocket it? It would be easy if he were in charge of the whole process. Instead, this process should be split among different individuals and reviewed, thus lending itself to less risk and less chance for error. Now, let's think about how these duties can be separated out to protect the monies and the people involved with student activities. First, Mrs. File should issue the tickets and count the items before and after the sale, not Mr. Knight. Mr. Knight can then oversee the sale of tickets or items and the issuance of receipts and collection of cash. Mr. Knight, who oversees the actual sale, should then complete the activity report. Mrs. File then can review the report and reconcile it to the tickets issued and returned and the cash collected. Mrs. File can also prepare a cash collection summary if needed and prepare and make the deposit. The item should not be done by Mr. Knight. The Student Activities Treasurer, Mr. Money, should then review all of the documentation, including the validated deposit slip. Mrs. File could then record the transaction instead of Mr. Knight. Mr. Money can then review the transaction and reconcile the bank account instead of Mr. Knight having that responsibility. So, through this process, the monies have been received, recorded, and deposited in a governing board-approved student activities bank account. One last note on student activities bank accounts before we conclude the cash receipts process and move on to any questions you have before Amanda covers the cash disbursement process. If feasible, monies in the student activities bank account should earn interest, and the interest should be proportionately allocated among all student clubs, or if approved by the clubs, it can be credited to the student council. Student club approval should be provided through written consent. However, as interest-bearing accounts often have fees associated with them, depending on carrying balances, it is important to note that any bank account fees associated with student activities are to be paid by the district, not by the club. If it is not beneficial to open an interest-bearing account based on the fees in comparison to the interest earned, or for other reasons, districts can opt to utilize non-interest-bearing accounts and document the reason for doing so. So, Chris, do we have some questions on the cash receipt process to address before we move on?
Chris, so this is Chuck, and I just make two announcements that I got to make at the beginning. The first one is that the webinar is being recorded and it'll be posted on our website either later today or tomorrow. And the second thing I forgot to mention at the beginning was that the PowerPoint presentation is already on our website if somebody wants to download it. So thank you for letting me interrupt.
Great, thanks, Chuck. Actually, we haven't received any questions about the cash receipt process yet, so Elizabeth, you did a great job explaining it evidently, and everybody has followed right along. If you do have any questions and want to go ahead and submit them, we'll continue on with the presentation, but we'll catch up with those at the end of the webinar. So Amanda, back to you.
All right. So now that Elizabeth has walked you through the receipt process, I'm going to cover the disbursement process. One of the most important things to remember is that student activity monies are student monies and are not an extension of district monies. Decisions about these monies should be made by the students with a sponsor involved, but the sponsor should not have undue influence on the decisions. One question we often receive is whether student clubs can donate to the district. The answer is yes, they can. However, you'll want to set a governing board policy that describes what types of items may be donated, or if you do not want student clubs to donate to the district. Let's go through a sample situation. Say that you hear that a club wants to donate projectors for 3 classrooms because the district doesn't have the money in the budget for these items right now. Even if the club wants to do something to benefit the school, ask yourself, is this purchase in line with the function of that club? Is it in line with what they had planned when they raised the money in the first place? If not, it could appear that the club did not come up with the idea on their own and that there may have been undue influence involved in getting them to agree to the purchase. Remember, student club disbursements should generally be for the direct benefit of the students in that club. The disbursement process on the slides that follow is designed for a district with 2 people in the district office and a separate club sponsor. When we separated these duties for disbursements, we kept in mind each person's related cash receipts duties to ensure that no one was given incompatible duties, such as having the same person receive cash, which would be a cash handling function, and record disbursements, which would be a record-keeping function. Let's take a look at how disbursements are processed for student activities. We're going to walk through the process, but remember that all the details are included in the student activities section of the USFR. Let's go through an example to see the appropriate separation of duties and the steps involved in the disbursement process. Let's say the chess club is having a meeting with a majority of the members present and has decided to make a disbursement using some of their club's funds for a new chess set and club shirts. What do they do now in order to make the disbursement happen and have all of the right documentation for the disbursement? First, the club must document the approval of disbursement of the monies in their club meeting minutes. These minutes become an important part of the support for the disbursement. After approval, the chess club officer or the sponsor, Mr. Knight, prepares a purchase requisition stating what they want to purchase and how many, and it needs to be signed by a chess club officer and Mr. Knight. The purchase requisition is then forwarded on to Mrs. Book, the bookstore manager. Mrs. Book knows that she should receive the signed purchase requisition with the club meeting minutes attached. However, this time the club forgot to attach the minutes. Should Mrs. Book process the requisition anyway? No, she needs to have support so the club approves the disbursement. So Mrs. Book requests the minutes from the club and verifies that the purchase requisition matches what the club approved in the minutes and that the requisition is signed. Our next step is to make sure the chess club has enough money for the purchase in their club account. Mrs. Book determined everything was okay and created the PO. The PO, along with the purchase requisition, is then passed on to Mr. Money, the Student Activities Treasurer. Mr. Money reviews the support in the PO, verifying that Mrs. Book checked the cash balance in the club's account. He also needs to determine if the disbursement is an appropriate use of the club's monies. He has determined that everything is okay and approves and signs the PO. The PO then goes back to Mrs. Book to order the chess set and club shirts from the vendor, Arizonan. As we conclude this part of the process, I have a few items to note. Remember, as Elizabeth covered earlier, the Student Activities Treasurer is designated by the governing board of the district and is responsible for overseeing all student activities. So it's important the Student Activities Treasurer reviews all POs and support before approving disbursements. Also, while we use the bookstore manager and the Student Activities Treasurer as the two people in the district office in our example, keep in mind that who they are is less important than the separation of responsibilities that is shown by having different people involved in the various tasks. Another item to note is if you are in an elementary school. The Student Activities Treasurer may accept the sponsor's approval of club disbursements rather than the club approval for certain grades, such as first grade. Finally, I have referred to a couple forms for this process, a requisition and PO. If your district doesn't run student activities through your official accounting system, there are sample purchase requisition and PO forms in the USFR that you can use. Now let's get back to our example. Mrs. Book ordered the chess set and club shirts, and now the items have been delivered to the district. Mr. Knight received the goods, which doesn't mean he was available to receive the package directly from the delivery person, but what it does mean is he was given the package unopened. Mr. Knight opens the package and documents the items were received on a receiving report and signs and dates the report. The receiving report and packing slips are given to Mrs. Book as evidence that the items were received. It is very important that Mrs. Book then compares the receiving report and packing slips to the purchase requisition and PO to make sure that the chess set and all of the club shirts were received and that no items were placed on back order or unaccounted for. Mrs. Book receives the invoice from the vendor, Arizonan, and compares the quantity and price on the invoice to the packing slip, receiving report, and the PO. When doing so, she notes the discrepancy on the invoice that they were charged for an extra shirt. Mrs. Book resolves the issue with Arizonan before paying the invoice. The club meeting minutes, purchase requisition, PO, and receiving report are all attached to the vendor's invoice and are kept as support for the disbursement. After the receiving process is complete, the next step is to pay the invoice. Mrs. Book prepares the check from the Student Activities bank account. The checks are secured in a locked drawer, and only she and one other person who is not a check signer has access to them. The check should identify the PO number and that it is for the chess club to allow the payment to be matched to the support. Mrs. Book marks the invoice paid and records the check number on the invoice. The supporting documents and checks are then given to Mr. Money. Mr. Money reviews the supporting document and signs the check. Mr. Money passes along the documents and check to the second authorized check signer, Mrs. Cursive. Mrs. Cursive reviews the supporting documents and signs and mails the check to Arizonan. Mrs. Cursive gives all the supporting documents back to Mr. Money. He then records the disbursement in the accounting records for the chess club and files the supporting documents. Just a quick reminder, your supporting documents are the club minutes, purchase requisition, PO, receiving report, and canceled invoice. A couple other reminders. The people who sign checks should never have access to the checks to help prevent fraud. It'll be harder for fraud to occur if the check signer does not have direct access to the checks. Also, remember the governing board designated student activities treasurer needs to sign every check since they are ultimately responsible for oversight of student activities monies. In order to conclude the whole cash receipt and disbursement process, a monthly bank reconciliation must be completed. To start, the person assigned to reconcile the account will need to add up the balances from the records for each club to get a total balance that then should be compared to the bank's balance. Support for the deposits and disbursements should be reviewed in this process to ensure that your records agree with the bank's records. Reconciliation needs to be prepared by someone who does not handle cash or prepare checks, someone like the student activities treasurer, Mr. Money, in our example. If that is not possible, the reconciliation should be reviewed by someone other than the preparer. For example, if the reconciliation is prepared by the bookstore manager, Mrs. Book, who has many of the duties related to cash handling that would be incompatible with preparing the bank reconciliation, then Mr. Money can review the reconciliation. When the reconciliation is finished, it should be signed and dated by the preparer and, if applicable, the reviewer. Reconciliations are very important in helping to reduce the risk of fraud and protecting everyone from false accusations of fraud. When the reconciliation is performed, any unusual transactions like unauthorized withdrawals or checks as well as shorted deposits should become evident as the club's supporting documents are compared to the bank statement. If everyone realizes someone else is checking up on the process, those that handle cash and issue checks will be less tempted to misuse student activities money. As Elizabeth mentioned earlier, many times we see all or most of the tasks related to a process assigned to just one individual. It is important to take the time to evaluate how each process should be separated or what compensating controls can be added. Let's walk through an example where our clerk, Mrs. File, has been given too many incompatible duties and see what we can do to fix it. First of all, Mrs. File prepares and approves POs, orders and receives goods, prepares and signs and distributes checks, records disbursements, and reconciles the bank account. So in this situation, it is possible for Mrs. File to purchase goods that no one else would know about because she has full control of the disbursement process. Therefore, there is an opportunity for fraud to occur, and certainly there is the chance of mistakes happening and going undetected. Let's say, for example, Mrs. File orders 10 embroidered shirts for the chess club and orders 5 other shirts embroidered with her husband's name on it to take home for him to wear for his business. If Mrs. File approves the PO, no one would know the order included more than what is needed for the club, and the club monies are being used to provide shirts to Mrs. File's husband. When the shirts come in, Mrs. File receives the package, and therefore no one else would realize that the package includes more shirts than were approved by the club. Mrs. File also has access to the blank check and prepares, signs, and mails the check written to pay for all 15 shirts, and since no one is looking over her work, no one would know. Mrs. File records the disbursement in the accounting records, and she also reconciles the bank account, so covering up the extra shirts is easy. Now, let's think about what jobs we can separate out and what compensating controls we can add to protect the monies and the people involved with student activities. Mrs. File prepares the PO, so she should not also approve the PO, So someone else needs to approve the PO, like the Student Activities Treasurer, Mr. Money. Having a separate person approve the PO can help detect mistakes, make sure the goods are appropriate for the Student Activities Club, and help prevent someone from ordering goods for a purpose other than for the students. Mrs. File should not receive the goods, but the sponsor of the club that requests the goods should receive them. That way, if items other than those approved by the club are included in the order, the sponsor will note that and can at least ensure that the club is not charged for those items. Mrs. File can have access to the checks and prepare the checks, but she cannot be a check signer. The Student Activities Treasurer, Mr. Money, must be one of the signers, and a second authorized signer, such as Mrs. Cursive, a teacher, needs to sign the checks. All checks must have 2 signatures. Mrs. File can still record the disbursements as long as Mr. Money reviews the disbursement posting for accuracy. Mrs. File then distributes the check to the vendor, Arizonan. And finally, due to the clerical nature of preparing a bank reconciliation, that duty can be left with Mrs. File. However, Mr. Money must review the bank reconciliation as a compensating control. Because Mrs. File is involved in so much of the cash receipt and disbursement processes, review steps are essential in order to detect any mistakes or unusual transactions. Throughout the webinar, we have been talking about how to have good records to support your student activities receipts and disbursements. Sound procedures and good records are important for several reasons. First of all, they help ensure accountability to the public, your parents, and your students. The last thing you want to have to say when asked something about the collection or use of the student monies is, I don't exactly know. Sound procedures and good records help you safeguard monies and give you the ability to answer questions from stakeholders. Secondly, sound procedures and good records teach students the right way to handle transactions. School is all about learning, and through club activities, students can learn real-life lessons about how to handle money, how to be responsible for inventory, cash collections, and how to budget and plan ahead for disbursements that they have a say in. And the last one I will mention today is that without sound procedures and good records, you can't meet the statutory requirement for reporting student activities financial information to the governing board monthly. This slide shows an example of what information is required to be reported. The monthly report of cash receipts, disbursements, transfers, and cash balances should be prepared by the Student Activities Treasurer, Mr. Money, and should be submitted to the governing board at least once during each calendar month. This report should include the month's beginning and ending cash balances, as well as all receipts, disbursements, and transfers. All of the amounts should be reported by club. For example, the chess club had a balance of $300 at the beginning of the month, and the students collected $500 during the month from the sale of tickets for their annual tournament. They spent $175 for the chess set and club shirts, leaving them with an ending balance of $625. This sample report also shows a different club situation. The Student Activities Treasurer, Mr. Money, noticed when he reviewed the bank reconciliation that the hiking club has not had any transactions this year. So he did some investigating and discovered that the hiking club doesn't have any members and really isn't operating anymore. So he determined that the hiking club was inactive and had the student council authorize the transfer of the club's cash balance to the student council. So on the slide, you can see the hiking club had $50 left in their account, and this $50 is transferred to the student council. Now that we have completed our walkthrough of the disbursement process, I have one more tidbit. We often are asked how a district can ensure they have the right procedures in place before they have an audit. After all, it's less painful to find and correct your own mistakes than it is to have someone come in and point them out to you. You can use the USFR compliance questionnaire that is available on our website as part of USFR Memorandum Number 249, and use this to check against what you are already doing and see where improvements can be made. The compliance questionnaire is created using the steps in the USFR, so if you need more details on how to address a problem you find, USFR is the place to go. Now it's time to see if you have any other questions. Chris, do we have some questions?
We do. Okay, so let's back up to some of the ones that were about the cash receipt process. Elizabeth had covered the information about bank accounts there and charging fees, not having the fees charged to the student club, but instead to the district. And one question that came up was, can you charge the club for a stop payment fee? The answer there depends on why the stop payment fee is happening. If there were some issue of the club needing to cancel that payment that they had previously wanted to make, and it was completely their decision to want to cancel that payment, the district had gone through the authorization process appropriately, seems like a reasonable step to help the club understand consequences of their actions and charge them the stop payment fee. But if it's related to, say, an advisor or sponsor of that club losing a reimbursement check and then needing a new one issued again, that wouldn't be an appropriate reason to charge a club for a stop payment fee. It's basically just like the banking fee in the first place, an administrative cost of having student activities money under your oversight. Another question that we got was, does the club need to have money in their account before ordering? And generally, the answer is yes. Depending on what the club is trying to do, perhaps it could be buying ahead for a fundraiser. The club could approach the student council and ask them if they would be willing to front the money for the purchase of, say, pencils, those wonderfully scented pencils that my girls love. And then they could sell those pencils and then reimburse the student council for the monies that were put out in the first place. But you don't want to get in the position of letting a club spend money it doesn't have. Another possible situation might be those candy orders and things like that. If there's an upfront cost related to it and the club doesn't have the money to do the candy order, they could, as Amanda pointed out, have a joint fundraiser. So I think that was Elizabeth. And if they did that joint fundraiser, then they could utilize a PTO perhaps, or a booster club, or even the district could agree to put forward the money for the fundraiser to begin and then just recoup that and perhaps even take a small portion of profit if they had some involvement with the fundraiser. A question came up also on whether or not the student activities treasurer has to be one of the two check signers on every check. Maybe you have 3 or 4 people authorized to sign student activities checks just in case someone's out of the office that day that you need a check, but does the student activities treasurer have to sign it, ladies?
Yes.
Yes.
By statute.
By statute. Right, that's in 15.11.22 paragraph A. It says that every disbursement needs to be signed by the student activities treasurer, or if you have multiple campuses and utilize an assistant student activities treasurer, that assistant student activities treasurer has to be one of the 2 check signers. Okay. We had another question about if a student council, or really any club, approves a certain amount for a purchase, when they submit in their minutes, they say they're going to pay the $100 for 10 T-shirts at $10. Right off, we all know it's probably not going to be exactly $100 for that purchase. There's going to be tax, or there's going to be freight, there's going to be some shipping costs. If you realize that up front and you can go back to the club and get them to understand that too, that's just a good learning experience for them. But if that one gets through and when the bill comes it's for $108, can you still pay it based on the authorization you have from the club that says we want to buy 10 T-shirts for $10? Amanda? Yes. Yes, you could definitely go ahead and pay it with that authorization, and probably want to do a good job of letting the club know, hey, by the way, that was an extra $8 involved here, and next time think a little bit ahead about what your interest, or I'm sorry, your tax or shipping costs might be. Because again, it's about helping them understand the real world consequences and issues related to making purchases. We had another question about student minutes and whether, if say a club has 25 members, is it enough for them to put in their minutes that 25 members were present and they all voted and agreed to do it, to make the purchase that they want to make, or do they each have to sign the minutes in order for them to prove that they all want to do it? Amanda?
No, you don't have to have an exact record of every vote, but if you just have to document that they did approve it and how many.
Right, and that's where you have your club officer and the sponsor are both involved in signing off on this requisition. You're attaching minutes behind. The sponsor's not going to let a club officer push the whole club into doing something. The sponsor's there to keep things running in line and make sure that the club actually does vote and that they carry out the wishes of the club. We also had a question about a club paying for teacher banquet tickets to, say, like Teacher of the Year banquet at the end of the year, and whether that was an okay expense for a club. And I think the issue here is that it's probably the school administration who's selecting the Teacher of the Year. It's probably the school administration who's honoring the Teacher of the Year. It's not the club. So asking the club to pay that expense is really not appropriate. It's not an activity of the club. If, by chance, your student council chooses to do something to recognize a Teacher of the Year itself, might not be as fancy as a banquet probably, then you're going to go ahead and allow them to make their vote of what it is they want to do. It should be something nominal in value. It should be something that's apparent and obvious that the student club wasn't, their arm wasn't twisted to make this very, very generous award to a teacher, but instead they're being able to express sincere appreciation. Another question was, where should you account for vending machine revenues? And the answer to that is, it depends. So we've been asked whether student activities can have vending machine revenues, and they can if there's agreements set up appropriately to show that this is an improved fundraiser for the students. But in general, those vending machine contracts are between the district and a vending machine company. They are generally auxiliary operations. We've been asked before if, say, a teacher's Sunshine Club, that buys breakfast once a month or something like that, could have those vending machine revenues, and that doesn't appear to be appropriate because, again, it's the district contracting with the vending company to have that vending machine there. So those monies really are auxiliary operations in almost every case. If you have a specific case you'd like to discuss with us, we'd be happy to discuss it with you. And you could email us at the address on the screen right now, asd@azauditor.gov, or give us a call at the phone number on there. Let's see. What account code would you recommend for the district to pay banking fees? The function, I think, is probably what you're asking the most about there, and it would be 2500 related to business services. The fees code is object-wise is 6810. If that wasn't what you meant, though, feel free to follow up. Let's see. Is it appropriate for the business manager instead of the treasurer to sign the checks and be the main approver of the POs? Okay, this is when we run into quite a little bit. The idea here is that whoever's really involved with the oversight of student activities the most is the person the governing board should be designating as the treasurer. So if it's really your business manager that is signing checks and approving disbursements, then it's really your business manager who should be assigned as the student activities treasurer. That means somebody else needs to be involved with other clerical duties like we've shown here for the bookstore manager. But it really doesn't matter what their title is. It depends on what their duties are. So if they're doing the job of the student activities treasurer, they should be the student activities treasurer. Let's see, can student activities have a credit card account? No. I suppose it's possible that an expense could be made ahead of time by a district employee if they have a credit card and it's been approved appropriately, and then the club could ratify paying for that expense. But I would stay away from student activities being on credit card charges because there's a lot of difficulty in confirming cash balances for the student activity club prior to making a purchase. So that's a great question. I'm glad it came up. Another one was, are there any considerations on the horizon to allow the business office to charge a fee to recoup some of the administrative costs from student activities? I assume we're talking kind of like an indirect cost for federal grants and things like that. I'm not aware of anything in upcoming changes to the statute that would allow that to occur. Right now, basically, the idea is the district is the fiduciary agent of these funds. It's up to the governing board to decide what fundraisers it will allow and what kinds of expenses it will have related to student activities. So certainly a governing board could take actions that would limit activities if it seems to be overly burdensome on shorted staff. However, at this point in time, there's nothing that would allow the district to charge the student activity clubs for the cost of administering them. We had another one that came in about, can a club sponsor a student for a registration fee for an athletic event? Possibly. It's going to depend on what that club's purpose is, and certainly if it was, say, the track club, and they had one really great runner this year that made it to a national kind of event, and they wanted to pay the fee for that student to participate, absolutely. They just want to make sure that they do the appropriate documentation in the club minutes that that's an authorized disbursement. Okay. We had a question that probably leads to one of the things we have seen before, again about the student activities treasurer. I think there might be a little confusion as to who we mean when we say student activities treasurer, and I've seen that at some districts that we visited in the past. The student activities treasurer is an employee of the district. Okay? It's not a parent. It's not a student. Okay? There could be a student who is treasurer of student council, but that does not make them the student activities treasurer. The student activities treasurer is an employee, and it's the person who is responsible for oversight of student activities money. There was a question about clubs wanting to give some, say like a gift card to staff that sponsored clubs this year. Again, I would make sure this was a very nominal amount and showing appreciation, but a lot of districts provide a minor stipend related to being a club sponsor, and or it's a basic requirement to do either club sponsoring or some type of after-school type of program, things like that that they get involved with. I'm not minimizing the effort that these people take to help and sponsor clubs, but again, the students are raising money for certain purposes and forwarding their activities to the club. You wouldn't want to see them spending a lot on acknowledging employees who are there really doing what they're doing for the students, not expecting to receive any kind of gift card from the students. Let's see. We had a question about, can you put not to exceed on a purchase order rather than a fixed amount? Absolutely. You could have the club approve the 10 t-shirts and say that will not exceed $130 in their minutes. You could put not exceed on the purchase order. You could make it out for $130. And then when the bill comes in at less at $108, then you'd be fine. And it's, you know, letting the club know ahead of time that there's going to be some extra costs. So that's a good idea. Can you have student activities requirements signed by the students rather than having the minutes kept with the record. I think what we're asking about there is, can you have the students just sign the requisition rather than having minutes kept for their records? I'm not sure when that would come up as being easier, because the student officer of the club is supposed to sign the requisition anyway, the sponsor and the officer if possible. So the officer isn't making a unilateral decision. It does have to be the club's decision. So having the club do that vote, getting the documentation in the minutes, again, it's just teaching the clubs to have good records of their own decision-making process, to learn something about maybe the parliamentary procedure involved with basically self-governance. So I think it's in your best interest, and it's definitely very workable to have them go ahead and document it in minutes rather than just asking about signing the requisition. Okay, we have another new twist on signing checks in the Student Activities Treasurer. It talks about Vision software perhaps generating the check and the superintendent's signature being printed by the software. So can the treasurer just add their signature manually to that check, and will that meet the requirements in the statute? You're required to have 2 check signers on all your checks anyway. It's a little uncomfortable that Visions adds the superintendent's signature to your checks in the first place. I hope that means that the superintendent has done something in the Vision system, in any of your accounting systems, to tell that system it's okay to put his signature on it, because the reason for having a signature stamp or an electronic signature is simply to save that person's hand the effort of signing, not to save that person the effort of approving. So if that approval is taking place appropriately and the system then generates it with that one signature, you still need a second signature, and if the superintendent is not the Student Activities Treasurer, that other signature needs to be the Student Activities Treasurer. Okay, we're getting down toward the end of questions. And one of them, can only the officers of a club agree on what they want to order, or does the whole club need to agree on ordering items? To some extent, that's going to depend on the structure of your club. If everybody in the club went in with the understanding that they're delegating the authority to the officers, and out of 5 officers, a majority rule creates the purchase, fine. But generally, students are a little more interested in having their say, and so I haven't seen that very often. So probably you're better off with encouraging them that the whole club, a majority of the club, needs to be involved in that decision-making process. Someone is indicating a nice idea for people. They have a sign-in sheet to note who attended club meetings when there was an activity approved. So along with their meeting minutes that says an activity was approved, they've got the sign-in sheet giving the list of who was there. Again, it's not required that they all sign and approve individually, but having a sign-in sheet is never a bad idea for, say, a later discussion about who didn't approve that. Well, yes, these people at this meeting today did. If buying supplies for an 8th grade class concession stand, do the students have to okay it before the supplies are bought? If it's a student activity, they do. If it's coming about in some other way, like a PTO volunteering to fund the items for sale by the 8th graders and share profits, then it wouldn't require student activities approval to purchase them in the first place. But if it's student activities money being used to make the purchase, it must be approved by the students ahead of time. If teachers accompany students as chaperones on field trips, can student activities monies be used to pay the entrance fee of the chaperones? Well, the field trip generally is going to be a school activity as opposed to a club activity, but I'm going to go with the benefit of the doubt here that what you mean is a trip to the club. So say the chess club wants to go and observe a chess tournament, and there's a minor entrance fee for going to that fantastic chess tournament. So when they go, they want to pay for themselves and for their adult chaperone, which would be required anyway. And that would be an appropriate club disbursement. And it should be authorized by the minutes before you do it. Can a club accept monetary or supply donations from outside sources in order to start fundraising? Elizabeth, I think you covered donations for clubs.
Yes, as long as the donation is specific to that club, then it can accept the donation.
Right. So that might help them out with the beginning of a fundraiser if they accept a donation to get started. Let's see. We were asked if a club that had money from a previous year with, say, new sponsors this year, if they could request for the meals for the players after the game to be paid from monies that were left over from last year. There are meeting minutes attached saying the club agreed to buy the food. And this is going to be for the kids, I'm sure, that are going along at a football event, and they want to maybe buy $5 at the local restaurant for each kid. If that's what the football club wants to do, and you've got appropriate authorization for it, definitely. The tweak on the question about money being left over from a previous year doesn't really matter if it was the football club's money left over from a previous year. So you don't have to zero out student activities from year to year. One place you want to watch out for that would be related to, say, a senior class. And as they're getting ready to graduate, or if you're in elementary, an 8th grade class getting ready to move up to the next level, you don't want them to have a big balance left over when they leave, because then you can't use it on the students that it was intended for. They could bequeath it down to the junior class or down to, say, the freshman class incoming to give them starting money, or they could use it for a different project or a trip of some type of fundraising event at the very end of the school to benefit student council, perhaps, something like that that they want to do. But it's a good idea to go ahead and take care of those things coming up toward the end of the year, keep them in mind ahead of time. Otherwise, money's rolling over from year to year in student activities is perfectly fine, as long as Amanda pointed out, it doesn't end up in a case where there's really no members in that club anymore, and the club is really inactive, in which case those money's rolling over from year to year don't make any sense. You should go ahead and bring it to the student activities treasurer should approve, and the student council should vote and approve to move the monies into the student council and basically eliminate the club from the accounting records since they don't really exist anymore. Let's see. There was a specific question on whether or not the bookstore manager could be the student activities treasurer. Again, it's really worth noting that it doesn't matter who is the student activities treasurer by their title. It matters that they have the right duties, that they have the authorization and signing duties, not the cash handling duties. So if your bookstore manager is receiving the cash directly from the sponsors, it's not a good choice to be your student activities treasurer. But if there's, say, clerk in the bookstore who's receiving the cash in the first place, then you could separate that out, and the bookstore manager could be the oversight related to student activities as the student activities treasurer. Okay, well, I see we're at 10:19, and so we have addressed most of the questions that came in. If there's something that was a little bit more specific, we've held on to it, and we'll certainly be in touch with you. If you feel like we didn't get to your question in enough detail and you don't hear from us in the next day or two, feel free to go ahead and either email or call us, number and email address on the screen. Again, we want to thank you for being involved in the webinar today, and let's see, Chuck's got a closing comment here.
One closing comment to make or whatever. First, I want to thank Chris, Amanda, and Elizabeth for your